Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Bray. I am the program director here at BroadFutures. And today we are joined by a very special, very loved guest in the BroadFutures community, Raymond Caldwell. Hi, Raymond.
Hi Ashley, how are you?
I'm good. Raymond and I spend a lot of time together in program and in shared space with our most fabulous interns and program participants. And Raymond has been with Broad Futures for how many years
Oh my goodness, I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't even know now. I feel like it's just become a part of like who I am in Washington, D.C., what I do. I don't even know. I want maybe four, three
I was
years,
gonna
four
say
years.
4. I think we're about 4, but I think this really speaks to like how ingrained you are into our Broad Futures community, the larger DC community, and how well loved you are that we feel your presence all the time.
Aw. I always say, and I say it every time I am hosting a gala, anytime I am ending programming, Broad Futures is one of my favorite things that I do in Washington, D.C. So I love it, and I love the community we've built.
Well, we love having you, and you make such a big impact on our program and our participants. And I think for all of our community members and everyone watching, can you share a little bit about some of the work you do with us and kind of where your focus is and kind of connecting the work you do out in the community with the work that you do with us at Broad Futures?
Yeah, of course. I always imagined a space and a place where theater could be used in the practical lives of folks in the world. The thing I love about the work that we're doing at Broad Futures is we're actually making those connections. We're actually taking uh, theater practices, theater games, and we're applying them to real life situations. It's some of my favorite work, and the work that I have always been very interested in was just that. How do we actually take theater and apply it to real life? There is an entire field of theater, and I regularly reference it, applied theater. And this is the field that I work in. This is the work that I have done for a number of years here in Washington, D.C. The work that we and the program that we've built at Broad Futures, I think is really unique and special because I think we are seeing transformation in young people's lives through the act of play, through the act of using our imaginations and building community, all using theater. Yeah, that's what I do with Broad Futures. And I think that connects to what I do and what I've done in my career and what I do here at Theater Alliance.
I think that is right on. And I think what you said of using theater, applied theater and play as really a tool for transitions, right? And so many of our young people, so many of our interns are going through that transitions. Sometimes transitions can be scary, new, nerve-wracking. And I think what they have found and what we have found as a program is the way you not just show up and interact with our participants, but the way you really intentionally use your applied theater and the games and the conversations and that building of community really helps kind of ease some of the tension and some of the scariness that goes along with transitions.
Yeah, I think that's really important to acknowledge and recognize because I think what many of our interns are actually learning in program is that these moments of transition, while this moment might be a major scary transition for them, they're going to constantly be experiencing these types of transitions. And so I think the program holistically actually prepares young people to confront those moments of transition in their future. And I think that's what's really special. And I think that, when I imagine what art does, art has always occupied that space in our lives, um, prepared us for what the future holds. And that's why we've always come to the theater, to see what is currently happening and what could happen to us, and to take larger lessons away from that. So I think the field of applied theater actually just takes that philosophy and really roots it in lived experience.
I love that. And I think we see it as not just a tool. So, for our interns who come in the program, are able to interact in this curriculum with you and with our larger team, it's not just a tool to help them remove barriers and increase access, but it's also a tool to help them tell their stories. And I know telling their stories has been something that you and I have been focusing on in our curriculum. I know that's something that you do outside in the greater DC community through your work. And so, can you talk a little bit about just how important that storytelling piece is on this smaller scale through kind of the impact and work we do, but also on our larger kind of community citywide scale as well?
Yeah, when I think about confidence, I actually think the center of confidence is actually being able to share unabashedly who you are and to move through the world confident in your own narrative. To be able to share who you are, to advocate for the things that you want is so vital and important. And, I think that what has happened in the field of art and what has happened in particularly the field of theater is that there have only been one subset of folks whose stories, whose narratives have been validated. And I think that that's so fundamental and important because I think our cultural institutions like theaters are supposed to be reflections of our everyday lives. And as I grew up in the theater, when I started learning and realizing that many of the stories that I was being fed were through the experiences of white people. And while the theater is an imaginative space, creates empathy for me to see my experience through the lens of someone else, I think it is just as important for narratives of people who look like me to be put on stage. And so, a lot of the work that I have done in DC from the time I arrived, I was doing a lot of early education work. And a lot of that education work was in middle schools, high schools, and even pre-K, empowering young Black people to tell their stories, to be confident in the stories that both were rooted in their communities and were that were of their imaginations. Because I think that's creating and garnering that space is really important. And as I moved on to teach at Howard University, same subset of ideas. How do I empower young people to be confident in the story of who they are, but also use their imaginations to imagine what the world is that they want? So that's and then I took over Theater Alliance, and it's really amazing to now have a platform where I can actually pour directly into playwrights whose stories aren't being told and actually lift those stories up for us as Washingtonians to have conversations about.
And I know one of the stories that you and Theater Alliance are telling right now is kind of the beautiful film called The City. Can you tell us a little bit about that, your work about it, and how important it is for us in Washingtonian as a community to kind of talk about this and have these conversations?
Yeah, I I keep telling folks that City in Transition, the Quadrant series, is the beginning of my love letter to Washington, D.C. I came to D.C. probably 13 years ago now. I was only supposed to be here for 6 months. Before that, I was living in the UK. I was not going to come back to America, but got this fellowship. And that's what brought me to Washington, D.C. That's what started me in the education sphere here in DC and the arts education sphere. Um, and I started falling in love with the city. And I was falling in love with the city because, as a child, I was told, and Washington, D.C. is a really complex city. It's always been called Chocolate City because it has always been a predominantly Black city and has been the epicenter of Black intellectual ideas, Black art, Black civil rights movements. The civil rights movement finds its roots early on here in the turn of the century. And so it's interesting to think about DC as a generative place for storytelling, particularly for folks whose stories have not been told on our stages. So City in Transition is the beginning of our exploration into this city that we call home. I've invited 4 playwrights to write 4 different plays set in each of the quadrants of Washington, D.C. Because of COVID, we couldn't produce plays in person, but I think it is so vital and important for generative artistic spaces to continue to create, even through a pandemic, because artists have always created through many pandemics, even before this one. And so I pushed these playwrights and my team to actually create a film, but a film that actually exists at the intersection of both film and live performance. And what is that? And so City in Transition is just that. And we get four different stories in each of the four quadrants of Washington, D.C., that tell very different stories, but I think when mixed together in the way that we present them, tells a really rich and interesting story about Black people, particularly in Washington, D.C.
It's such a beautiful piece of work, City in Transition, and the story of Washington, D.C.'s history and those four quadrants. And I think being able to especially mix it with the times that we're in now, and the work that we're doing now that is long overdue and so important. And so I thank you, Raymond, for bringing those stories and sharing those stories with our broader Broad Futures community, but also with us and Broad Futures. It's very important reflection pieces for us. And we are so grateful for that. And we hope that you can continue to make work and inspire. And we hope that you continue to do that work with Broad Futures as well.
Oh, of course, of course. I cannot imagine my time in DC without Broad Futures, and I am just so excited to be a part of this community. Thank you for always supporting the work, my work both at Broad Futures and as we've been developing the program, but also my work artistically as I've been out and about. So I appreciate y'all.
And how can people go and view the City in Transition? Can we share with, and I think we have a
Yeah.
special code for the Broad Futures community as well.
Yeah, so if you go to theateralliance.com and it's theateralliance.com, you can actually click through to the link and get tickets to see City in Transition. If you enter the code Broad Futures, you'll get a discount. So yeah, definitely check it out and let us know what you think.
Yes, please, please check it out. And Raymond, thank you for all of your wonderful work, both in and outside of our Broad Futures community. And we are excited to continue these conversations. Thank you.
Of course, thank you.